Welcome to video 4 in this 9-part series on negative interest rates, trying to understand how they are going to impact your investments, your portfolio. We just finished a 3-part series just on the Federal Reserve, and I want to make a comment because I received some feedback from folks as they're watching these videos on YouTube that to the right of the video, there's other videos that YouTube finds in common that you may be interested in. And many of them are very conspiracy oriented. And I just wanted to make a comment on that. I can't control what YouTube puts to the right of their videos. And speaking of this word control, I mean, that's one of the threads we're talking about in these themes that are going through these videos. But speaking of control, you can control your life. You can control your investments, your portfolio. And that's really what we're trying to accomplish in this series. We have all these different finance and economic dynamics hovering around us. How do they affect our lives, and how do we best manage through those? Do I believe there are backroom deals and manipulations? Of course I do, and I pointed many of those out in the videos. But again, it comes back to this point of control. You nor I can go to Janet Yellen at the Federal Reserve and wag our finger in her face saying, we know what you're doing, or we're not going to be able to burst into a room of bankers or high-powered money brokers and shed light on it and change the whole system. That's not going to happen. This is what we can control, and that's the point of me doing this series, is to educate you and to help you navigate these economic conditions. Okay, so let's jump into the Great Depression here. We're going to do this in 2 videos. My disclaimer just took too much time, and plus, again, it's a pretty deep subject. So the first video, we're going to talk about how we got into the Depression. And the second video, we're going to talk about why it was so severe and how we ultimately got out of it. So let's put a stake in the ground here about getting out. We got out of the Great Depression because of World War II. If you remember up here in these themes that we're covering throughout this series, one of the themes is that we can't grow out of this debt overhang mess we have, because there's deflation in the system. We can't grow out of it, and we could not grow out of the Great Depression without World War II. Not by coincidence, it was World War I that set the Great Depression up. So what do I mean by that? Well, coming out of World War I, England adopted a massive welfare program where they allowed a strong network of labor unions to be formed, and that created a lot of price overhead, right? So England is a trading nation. They don't have a lot of natural resources. And if you're a trading nation, you need your currency to be low. And if you want a low currency, that means prices have to be low, including labor, which is one of your biggest prices. But the problem is you had the politicians that not only didn't have the courage to address this issue, but they actually bid this up in order to get more votes. So over several election cycles, England became a debtor nation, meaning payments to other countries was larger than her income. And so because of this situation, as you can imagine, the gold reserves within the country started leaving in droves. And when your currency is backed by gold, that creates a problem. So if you remember in the previous videos, I talked about how the ties between the US, England, France, Europe is so close from different family money and central banking. In fact, JP Morgan, the house that Morgan built, was chosen by the English and the French governments as an official agent to sell their war bonds in the US in order to raise money to finance the war. And when you have a major bank and brokerage firm having millions of dollars invested from here, and the war, World War I, is not going well, and there's a chance that all this money can be lost, something has to happen. And that's a whole nother subject about how the United States entered into the war. But there is clear evidence that JP Morgan was an agitator for American entry. So we have this connection, and in 1927, actually it was July 1927, there was a very important meeting between Montague Norman, who was the governor of the Bank of England, Hjalmar Schacht, who was the head of the German Reichsbank, Charles Rist, who was the governor of the Bank of France, and you guessed it, from the Federal Reserve, it was actually the Federal Reserve, the New York branch, was Benjamin Strong. Strong had incredibly close ties with J.P. Morgan personally, and the point was Strong and Norman wanted to get together and figure out how they could get gold back into the English coffers. The strategy was to lower interest rates in order to encourage lending, and if you do that, what happens to your currency? Well, the opposite that was happening over here, our currency went up. So if our currency goes up, that means our goods, our exports, are more expensive. Not only does that make them more expensive in the world market, but it eventually drives inflation. The entire goal of this was to make our gold deposits exit over to the partners in Europe. So through a 6-year period, there was this big infusion of money. One tranche was $492 million, and the second one was $445 million. So through a 6-year period, this much money going through the fractional reserve banking system in the United States, this equated to over $10 billion of new money in our system. Now, today we talk in the trillions, so you think, well, that's not that much money, but in 1927, $10 billion was an enormous monetary injection into our system. These dynamics caused our exports to go down, which then caused our unemployment because everything's more expensive. Layoffs occur, our unemployment went up. So this pattern would continue until the big crash. So let's look at some documentation to make sure we're all on the same page with this. This is actually communication written from Benjamin Strong in 1929 to Parker Gilbert, who was an American agent for reparations. And here's the quote from the letter. Our policy in the last 4 years, up to this January, has been effective in accomplishing the purpose for which it was designed. It has enabled monetary reorganization to be completed in Europe, which otherwise would have been impossible. It was undertaken with the well-recognized hazard that we were liable to encounter a big speculation and some expansion of credit. I'm going to touch on this point right here, what the big speculation means, and the expansion of credit was what I was talking about, the infusion of money into our system. Our course was perfectly obvious. We had to undertake it. The conditions permitted it, and the possibility of damage abroad was at a minimum. Abroad? What about the damage domestically? Well, that wasn't obviously a major concern. So, big speculation and expansion of credit, what is he referring to? Well, when you lower interest rates here, when you lower interest rates and make this easy credit, there's speculation that occurs. And what do I mean by that speculation? Well, that is what we're going to talk about in the second video, which points to the severity, what made it a Great Depression. So at this point, I'm going to end this video. I'll look forward to speaking to you again on the second Great Depression video. Thanks for watching.